Hello. So in the next couple of videos, I'm just going to try and look at a little bit of journalism related stuff. So the journalistic process is primarily comprised of four different elements. One is the reporting bit where the news information is gathered. The other is the design bit where news information is designed into a layout. News information is designed into the presentation bit for the broadcast, or even for radio there is some bit of design involved, just not in terms of graphic design as such, but more to do with the design of the elements as they go into the go through the medium. Then there is the editorial bit, which comprises of two main elements: the chief editors and the sub editors. They're two different parts. And then comes the printing and publishing bit. So from the NET perspective, and even from a journalism student perspective, you just need to know the reporting and the editing bit. Graphic design is for sure really important, but from the print journalism perspective, it's just mostly to do with the layouts and the different principles of design and stuff. I have already shared a video with you guys related to the different types of layouts, so please go through it. So, if you have to look at the organizational structure of a newspaper, it is the publisher right on top. When I say the publisher, I'm primarily referring to the owner. It's registered as the name of a publisher, but it's technically the person, the individual, or the group of people who owns the particular news house. And then comes the editor is in charge. Again, editorial team is, there's the chief editor, and the chief editor is primarily looking after the editorial page, the tone, the voice of the entire newspaper, and the kind of ideologies that are being disseminated. And then there are multiple editorial writers who are parallel to the editor in the same sort of a pyramid hierarchy, under whom comes the managing editor. Sometimes it's one individual, sometimes it's a team of managing editors, depending on the size and the volume of the news organization. Under the managing editor comes the sub editors. Now, sub editors are divided on the basis of their beats. Like there is the city beat, there is the crime beat, there is the business beat, there's the sports, there's the economics. There's so many different beats. Beats are areas, right? Like if someone says I'm a journalist who works for the crime beat, it means they report crime stories, they edit crime stories. And under these individual editors are reporters. Again, there are senior reporters, junior reporters, and then there are cubs who follow the news reporters. So this is sort of like the hierarchical structure. Now again, the designer directly reports to the sub editor, or sometimes directly to the managing editor. The designer doesn't really work with the reporting team much, because the sub editors involve themselves to the extent of deciding the size, the amount of space that needs to be allocated for each of the stories. They already have an idea of what kind of stories are going to come in, so based on that, they sort of, I'm so sorry, they sort of have a vague idea of how much space each story deserves, based on the value, that the importance that that particular news story deserves. So one of the today, let's look at a little bit of editing, because I thought I'll talk to you about editing tomorrow. The next video that I'll upload day after tomorrow will be mostly on reporting. Today I'll talk about the editing process as much as possible. So the editors, the sub editors, usually assign beats. They for example, if there's a reporter in the crime beat and there's something very important, like maybe there was a robbery that was of a huge uh, sort of, maybe that has gained a lot of traction, then the sub editors assign a particular reporter to go to that particular location, and that reporter gathers information. Usually when the reporters gather information, if you have already worked in the newspaper industry, or even if you have worked as reporters or editors for your own newsletters, you will probably have noticed that these stories are usually presented to you in the form of bullet points with everything haphazardly arranged. So the sub editor's job is to then rearrange and make the entire story readable. So basically, the reporter is the person who goes to the market and brings all the vegetables randomly and just puts it in one bag for you, right? As the sub editor, you will take out all the vegetables and all the ingredients one by one, take a look at it, then decide what to chop first, what goes in first, what goes in next, and then finally make the dish. So the plating comes where the chief editor's job is. He or she comes and takes a look at the whole dish and then plates it and presents it to the uh, client or customer. So, some of the other roles of the sub editor is to choose or reject articles, also to direct the focus in a story, that is, which angle the story has to go, what are the things that people need to pay attention to when they're reading stuff. Cutting stuff, if you've noticed, editing always is symbolized with the icon of of a pair of scissors. So, cutting out stuff from the story to eliminate unwanted, unnecessary content, also content that might land you in trouble. All of this is the sub editor's job. Enhancing the story wouldn't be too much of a justice to say to sensationalize it, but yeah, that's to an extent to also sensationalize it, but also to make it sort of nice to read, make it nice to uh, talk about and stuff, just something that is beautified and presented, and also to set the agenda. I'm going to talk about agenda setting theory towards the end of journalism, the subject. So, in that, they basically talk about what the audiences need to know. So, that those are some of the primary roles of the sub editor. The chief editor takes the main decisions of the important stories, of the main stories, what kind of tone, what kind of content needs to be used, and also writes the editorial piece, the main editorial piece, where the opinion of the newspaper is reflected through the language used. So that's one thing. And also, most times the chief editors also sort of involve themselves in the design bit, as to deciding what it looks like, what kind of photographs can be used, and what kind of spacing and tone can be used and stuff like that. So, in all of this, the managing editor also has a few roles. One is to sort of strategize and give ideas, also to give feedback, and also to assign certain people to certain roles. It's mostly like an HR sort of a job, not to do with journalism. It's more to do with how managerial the entire process of being in a newspaper organization is. So, those are some of the roles and responsibilities. Some skills that the news editor needs to possess is to be able to coordinate, to be able to communicate phone calls and even emails or whatever, to be able to coordinate, to be able to scan resources and constantly keep gaining knowledge. If you know, it's you can't directly join a news organization as a sub editor or into the editorial team with no prior experience. You need to have a lot of experience in the journalism industry before you become an editor or a sub editor. That's because of how much knowledge, how much skill and experience you need to have gained over a period of time. Also, the editorial team will need to be able to brief the news reporters, go here, go there, go collect this kind of information. I want exactly this piece of information. I want a bite from this particular person. That sort of briefing to the reporters has to be done through the editorial team, to be able to read and analyze and also predict the impact of a news story. That's another very important quality. To also change the angle of a particular news story. The two terms that you'll need to sort of pay attention to, one is called slanting of a news story. This was an NET question twice in the previous few question papers. Slanting of news is basically the process of choosing a mild bias towards one side of a news story. That process is called slanting. There's another process called renosing, renosing, which is to change the angle. The reporters would have brought it with a certain angle, but after you go through all the facts and all the figures and all the data available and the public conversations and everything, you realize that the angle needs to be slightly modified. That process is called renosing, which is also done by the editorial team. And also to make sure that you deal with public complaints and public grievances, that is handled by the editorial team. So the sub editor's job pretty much is very difficult in this context. There's also a person called copy taster. This is also a very important question from the NET perspective. Copy tasters are also known as slot editors. Uh, the copy taster's job, unlike your sub editors or the managing editors, is to primarily choose and reject content. Choosing, approving. Copy tasters are someone who have spent a lot of time in the news organization, understood the ideology, understood the tone and the kind of audiences, the kind of readership that the newspaper enjoys, based on which the stories are assigned and based on which the stories are selected, approved, rejected. The copy taster also manages the traffic control, that is how traffic in terms of how much stories are received, how much stories are not just received from reporters. Stories are gathered from multiple sources, including two primary sources are the reporters and the wires. Wire is these different news agencies that supply news to all the different newspapers. So traffic control is another role of the copy taster. And bifurcation, that is to be able to assign each news story a particular slot, a particular space and all of that. And also goes to the extent of vetting the headlines. The sub editors write the headlines, the copy tasters vet the headlines, VET vet. So that is pretty much like the overall structure of the editorial team. Now, some of the things that the editor also the sub editors will have to pay attention to is to take a look at the language. For example, some of the things that are very important in the language bit is to avoid superlatives. That is something the editor has to look at. Avoiding superlatives means using words like the best, using words like biggest, using words like the one and only. Things like that are avoided, and that is taken care of by the sub editors. Hoax, any hoax that is being published and that might land the newspaper into trouble, that is also being taken care of by the editing team. Changing quotations if at times someone needs to be given attribution, all forms of attribution, sub editors. And also erroneous facts that could land you in trouble, using the exact words to describe something, you have using that kind of the vocabulary, the kind of punctuation, avoiding stereotypes, respecting ethnic groups, taking care of sexism, racism within the content, ageism. So things like that. uh, Also to go to the extent of proofreading the news stories. Another very important thing, and also there are some specialized people in the news team called the copy editors. The copy editor's job is to correct the content, to check the content, and to condense the content. So it's called the CCC, triple C function. Grammar, typography, styles, the unit count, that is how many words are going into it, and giving instructions to the printer, the size of the headlines, all of these are taken care of by the copywriters. So I don't think we need to talk about tenses and all of that. There's another thing that you will have to know. There is something called the style book. This will be the last thing that I will be talking in this video. And style book is a book. It is a rule book that consists of all the important points in terms of design, in terms of words, in terms of vocabulary, in terms of the story structure, in terms of the kind of photographs that you need to use. It is like the Bible for the news organizations. Each news organization has their own style book in which the kind of fonts that need to be used, the kind of photographs, the kind of colors, the kind of color palettes, the kind of laws, the legal repercussions, the overall purpose, that is the mission statement of the news organization, all of that is mentioned in the style book. And each reporter is expected, everybody who joins the news organization is expected to thoroughly be familiar with each and every concept that is being presented in the style book. So these are some of the things that you will need to know. Tomorrow, I think I'll post another video on the editing team, and then we'll go to the reporting bit.